One of the top questions we often get asked here at Mind Pump is, should women train and eat differently than men? That's what we're going to be exploring in today's episode. Ladies, should you do things differently when it comes to fitness than guys? Let's get into it. This question is a good one, and I get where it comes from because, of course,
it's a bit nuanced.
Well, our bodies are different. There are differences between us. Yes. So just our shape alone is different. So I have a 15-year-old daughter that plays soccer, and she's doing lacrosse. And the data on ACL tears with female athletes shows a distinct difference between female athletes and male athletes. I think, if I'm not mistaken,
hips are wider, and so it causes that discrepancy there.
Yeah, I don't remember how much more likely they are to potentially tear an ACL, but it's significantly higher. I want to say 7 times higher, if I'm not mistaken. And it's exactly that. There's a difference in hip to waist ratio and shoulder ratio. So that does mean your body's built a little different. So that does, I guess, lend itself to the question, like, should we train differently?
Should we, adjust for this? Yeah.
That's right. Then there's fat distribution. What is this? 2 to 8 times more likely. Okay, so it's up there. Fat distribution is different in men and women. Women tend to store it more in the hips, thighs, lower body. Men will store it more in the midsection. Men tend to also have more visceral body fat than women do. So there's a difference there. So that also would want you, kind of pose the question, maybe we should do things a little different when it comes to health and fitness. And then I think the biggest difference between men and women, or at least the biggest difference we can measure distinctly, is hormone profile. Yeah. Hormone profile is quite different. Now, we have the same hormones. So there's this myth that estrogen is a female hormone, testosterone is a male hormone. But estrogen and testosterone and all the hormones are all human hormones. In other words, men and women have the same hormones in our bodies. The difference is the ratios or the amounts of each one. And of course, another difference is a man's hormone levels are relatively stable all the time, whereas a woman's hormone profile cycles through a 30-day or 28 to 30-day cycle. So that's a pretty big difference. And hormones, of course, are drivers in the body, and they do tell the body where to store body fat, how much body fat to store, build the muscle. They can influence our mood and our cognitive function. But nonetheless, low estrogen in a man causes the same symptoms as low estrogen in a female, low testosterone in a man, low testosterone in a female. Yeah. Like, we all need all those hormones.
Balancing them out pretty much is the same process.
Yes. We all need all of those things. But yeah, this question I used to get, this is probably a top 5 or 10 question that I would get as a trainer. Did you guys experience that as well?
Yeah, and I mean, generally speaking, it's going to look very similar in terms of the training. But like, you can get into the nuance of it, and like you mentioned, athletes. You mentioned, certain physiological differences that if you could, adjust some things, we could, change the programming a little bit, but for the overall generalization of what's going to work best, like the 2 different plans are going to be very similar.
Yeah. I used to get asked this all the time. It was probably one of the most common questions taking on a client. And I think a better way to frame it would be or the better way to ask this question would be not that, should we train differently, but what are some of the considerations that you take in when training a female? I think that's more appropriate because that you can take that, replace woman with somebody who has one leg, somebody who's a child, and then I would still have all these similar things I would consider. And so this idea of it's this black and white of men should train this way, women should train this way is false and not true. But there are specific considerations that I'm thinking about or making or asking when going through diet, exercise, all these things, because we do have differences.
I'm glad you said that, because what the fitness industry has done, one of the disservices it's done is it's made it appear to be a very black and white or huge difference. This is strength training for women. Right. This is cardio for men. This is diet for women.
Diet for women, yeah.
And that's just, to be clear and frank, you guys, it's just effective marketing. If I sold a multivitamin and let's say I sold 10,000 units, it's pretty reliable that if I made that multivitamin, say for women and for men, I'd probably sell 5 to 10% more. It's pretty reliable just in the supplement space. So the anybody that sells anything knows that when it seems to be more directed at you, and a great way to do this is to say for women, for men, you're just going to sell more. So we are far more similar than we are different. And now we're going to go through the nuances though, and kind of break them down. And at the end, talk about, what considerations we would modify training and diet around in regards to men and women. First off, let's go with diet. So is there a difference with diet? Now, here's what I noticed. Now, this is true for men and women. You want to lose weight, you got to take in less calories than you burn. Can't get around that. That's a very oversimplified way of looking at fat loss. But what I just said is also true. And if you want to gain weight, you have to eat more than you burn. But one thing that I did notice over the years, and this became apparent after I trained lots and lots and lots of people, was that women's bodies were generally more sensitive to calorie restriction. Okay. In other words, they would hit a wall sooner or faster, or we would notice hormone imbalances that were a little bit more pronounced in women, generally speaking. And I say general because there's lots of individual variance here. When it comes to calorie restriction, and this used to show up as a woman losing her period. And that, the theory around this is that, a woman's body needs to, from an evolutionary standpoint, support life. And so her body's just more sensitive to calorie restriction. And one thing that it'll do is an adaptation. By the way, this is very common with female athletes. Female athletes will lose their period often because their food intake isn't high enough to meet the demands, or they're overtraining or whatever. Is you'll see this, they tend to be more sensitive to this, to the potential negatives of calorie restriction.
Well, the law of thermodynamics still applies the exact same to both men and women. A consideration that I am thinking about when I'm training a female client is a large percentage, if not all clients that I started training that were female, almost all, if not all, were grossly under eating protein. They also many times were under eating healthy fats. And so when I'm taking on a client like that, I'm taking that in as a consideration. And the number is so high that almost always the first thing that I need to do is reverse diet, increase protein, and increase healthy fats. And if the goal is to lose body fat, and there are cases where maybe somebody comes in, and if there is a case of a client that eats an excess of calories and hits protein, it's normally my men. My men are more likely to eat enough protein or more likely to eat a plentiful amount of calories. So the way I approach, or the considerations that I go when writing a diet or doing that for a client, is a little bit different. Although the same laws still apply, there's considerations that I'm taking in when I'm getting ready to train a client.
Great point.
And that's just through years and years and years of training hundreds of women. I have found that it's very common that they were under eating, and they had slowed their metabolism down so much they weren't getting enough protein, and many times were not getting enough healthy fats.
That's a good point. And I think that's because societally speaking, women are more likely to be trying to just get skinny.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes men are trying to build.
Year round.
Yes. So they're coming to you. I think physiologically, they're also more sensitive to calorie restriction, just from the point that I made. But I also think they probably have a longer history of excessive dieting.
Yeah.
And so what you would see with female clients was just you had to be more careful with calorie restriction, because you would start to see some of the negatives pop up a little sooner or be a little bit more pronounced. This, by the way, would show up with fasting as well. So when fasting became all the rage, which this is, fasting's been around for thousands of years for different reasons, but when it became the rage for weight loss, I had never seen this with male clients, but I saw with female clients who would do this, where they'd have these long periods without food, day after day after day, where they're like, oh, I don't start eating till 4 or whatever, is they'd start to get these weird, like, overstress symptoms. Even if their calories seemed adequate, like hair would thin, they'd start losing hair. They'd start to get
skin was affected.
Yes, symptoms of what we used to call back then adrenal fatigue. It's now labeled different, HPA axis dysfunction. So I would just notice that. I never noticed that necessarily with men. Not saying it can't happen, but with women, they tend to be more sensitive to fasting. Yeah. They also can tend to be more sensitive to carb restriction. And the way this would show up, and you'll hear this from functional medicine practitioners, is thyroid issues that can occur. And this can happen with men as well, but women in general tend to have more thyroid dysfunction type situations, both autoimmune. So you see Hashimoto's is more common with women than men, but also just from carb restriction. So I think in general, when it comes to diet, women tend to be more sensitive to the extremes with diet than men tend to be. Again, this is a general statement. There's a big individual variance, but just something to consider. Today's program giveaway is the RGB bundle. If you're interested, leave a comment below this video in the first 24 hours that we drop it. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications. If you win, we'll let you know in the comments section. Also, because of this episode, MAPS Muscle Mommy and MAPS Starter are 50% off. If you're interested, go to mapsfitnessproducts.com and then use the code FEMALE50 for the discount. Here comes the show.
And I think a lot of times I guess it's not stated enough that like in the 20s and a little higher in that range in terms of body fat's a much healthier place to be for women, and it's not the same for men.
You're right.
And so to compare, and I know that that's hard a lot of times. Like my husband, he just barely stopped eating, lowered his calories, just a little bit. And he's already like lean and he's losing weight, and it's frustrating. But in terms of like your overall body's function and it being optimal, like that's a healthy place to be.
Yeah, both men and women have an essential amount of body fat they need to carry, and a woman's essential body fat's higher. So a woman walking around at 20% body fat is fit, healthy, is lean. The equivalent for a man is somewhere around 14%. Okay, so you can see there's a big difference, a 6% difference.
Well, because too, athletes, that's where you get into kind of because you see like they won't have their period, they will have like signs of like stress and like hair brittle and that kind of thing, and it's they're lean and they're muscular and they look great and healthy, but again,
hormones get really affected.
Hormones get affected.
Now, when it comes to training, here's what's interesting with training, and there's data to support this. Again, it's a small difference. This is a major difference. But women seem to do better with more volume in their training, but tend to do worse with high intensity. Okay, so let's explain the difference between volume and intensity. Volume is the overall workload, sets and reps and time in the gym and how often I'm working out. Intensity is how hard you work out. And what I would see with my clients was with men, they would get away with higher intensity. Women would get away with more volume than men. And by the way, there's data that suggests that this is the case, that this generally is the case, that women can handle a little bit more volume, but they can't handle the same intensity, and vice versa. You can come up with your own, reasons as to why. We don't know, but it does seem to be the case where, a protocol, for example, of like a 1 set to failure and beyond per body part type routine, heavy duty, Mike Mentzer style workout. Women don't seem to respond nearly as well to that. They tend to respond more to the more traditional volume approach, whereas some men really respond well to the high intensity, low volume approach.
Again, here's an example of where the science in building muscle and burning body fat, when it comes to exercise selection, sets, reps, tempo, timing, all those things are the same for a man as is the same for women. Here are some considerations that I take when I'm training a female. Most of the female clients that I trained avoided really lifting heavy weight, 5 or lower reps. And they tend to lean towards the higher volume, lots of repetitions, the same weight, the same exercises. And so I know that training that client, that if I train them the way that they've already been training all their life, I'm going to see little to no change. Whereas if I could convince that female client to move over to low reps, heavy weight, it's such a novel stimulus for them, I'm going to radically change their body.
And that trumps everything I just said with the data.
That's right. Yeah. And so here's a situation where, and that science still applies for men, but it's a different consideration. Men tend to lift really, really heavy weight because they want to build and have big muscles. And so the novel stimulus direction I take them is over in the higher rep range. And so here's an example of where the science is the same to build muscle or burn body fat for both male and female. So all this same rules apply with sets, reps, tempo, all those things, but a consideration that I'm going to take in when I'm training the client. Also, my female clients, they always tend to lean more on the safer and controlled side and not want to take risks. Therefore, they avoid failure training. It's not, they would be always 2 reps short of failure. And so taking my client to failure or putting weight on there that maybe she thought she couldn't do is different. That's the same science for men, but guess what? The men have no problem putting on weight. They probably shouldn't even move and trying to attempt it. And so another example of how I'm going to, as a trainer, approach training these two sexes differently, although the science still applies the same when it comes to building muscle and burning body fat.
Yeah, and now next, and I think this is the biggest difference between men and women, is just the aesthetic preferences. This is where the big difference lies, right?
That's right.
Strength training in particular is this wonderful form of exercise for many reasons, but one of the reasons why it's so great is it's the most targeted form of body sculpting form of exercise you'll find, period, end of story. There's no form of exercise like strength training where you can look at your body and try to change the shape of it based on how you train. Like every other form of exercise has their cycling looks the same for everybody, running looks the same, swimming looks the same, but when it comes to strength training, there's exercises for shoulders and back and biceps and triceps and obliques and abs and hamstrings and glutes and calves and quads. And I can shape and sculpt my body like a sculptor. And so this is where there's a big difference between men and women. It's what aesthetics they're looking for. Now, if I were to say to you guys right now, what day do men typically skip and what day do women typically skip? You're getting two different answers.
Yep.
Yeah? Yep. Guys like to skip leg day, women like to skip arm day or whatever, right? So this is the biggest consideration in training is women tend to, the body parts that women develop that tend to lend themselves well to the aesthetic that most women are looking for tend to be like delts, back, and then the posterior chain. So nice looking delts gives them the arms that they're looking for. It's actually not the arms that they're looking for. It's the delts that they're looking for when they say they want nice arms. The back adds this nice posture to the woman. And then the posterior chain, the glutes and hamstrings, which tends to give women the kind of legs that they're looking for. Those are the considerations. And with men like delts too, but they also like chest. And then, they like biceps and triceps, and they look at quads a little bit more. So that I think is probably the biggest difference between the two.
I so agree with you. But again, the science is the same. If I had a male client and a female client come to me and say they described this exact, they both described the same physique that they wanted to go get, I would approach them same training.
Right.
But the reality is I have never had a guy hire me and go, Adam, I want to build my glutes and make them bigger and tone my arms. That has never been said by any man that has ever hired me for training. So because they have different goals that they are trying to achieve, this is where the programming does start to look a little bit different. Science still is applied the same way. You do these exercises, these reps, this is how you build muscle, this is how you burn fat. That doesn't change for the sex. But what does change for the differences in the sexes, they tend to have different goals. They tend to want to look differently. So then my approach to what exercise selection that we do, what area, what muscle groups do we focus on more, where do we put more emphasis than other areas, that's why all of a sudden the programming might start to look a little bit different.
And to give you an example, so we have a program called Muscle Mommy, and in that program, when you're doing a workout where you're hitting, let's say, your chest, shoulders, and triceps, or your upper body, typically in workout programming, every trainer knows this, you tend to do chest before shoulders. Okay, so if you were to do a bench press and a shoulder press in a workout, typically it's the bench press first, shoulder press second. Now, if you're a woman who wants to prioritize her delts over her chest, then most women could care less about developing their pecs. They should train their chest because it's a muscle, but I've never had a woman come to say, I want bigger pecs. Their workout would look different. Their workout would start with an overhead press. And then the bench press will be later in the workout, right? Posterior chain's a good example. We might do more hip hinging movements and exercises like hip thrusts over exercises like leg extensions, okay? So that's a good example of how your programming would look different to prioritize and add more volume, and then priority in terms of exercise selection to the areas you want to develop over the others. What this isn't saying is that you should only train the body parts you want to develop and ignore the other ones, because that is, just side note, that is a road towards injury and poor aesthetics. So like if you just trained the body parts you wanted and avoided the others, you would cause problems and you wouldn't look very good. This episode is brought to you by PRX Performance, some of the best home gym equipment you'll find anywhere. If you want 5% off, click right here. Next up, supplements. Now, supplements, nutrient demands, very similar, but there are two nutrients in particular that women need to take more than men. Typically, when you look at nutrient demands, what they tend to look like—
Iron? What's the other one?
Yeah, iron and folate.
Oh.
Yeah. When you look at nutrient requirements, they tend to be higher in men, not mainly because men are bigger and heavier and we eat more food. So this much vitamin C for a man versus this much, it's a little bit more, right? This much calcium, this much whatever. But one nutrient women typically need a lot more than men, and that's iron. Why? Because they lose blood every month during their menstrual cycle. In fact, there is evidence that shows that men are healthier if they donate blood once a year, because they could build up iron in their bodies, whereas women don't get that at all. So foods and supplements containing iron tend to be more important, not necessarily necessary, but just more important for women than they are for men. And then folate, because folate's a very important nutrient, especially during pregnancy, which of course men don't get pregnant.
And again, this is just another example of considerations. Because women need more iron, folate, and then I'd also make the argument that because women tend to undereat protein the most, I'm considering protein as a supplement I'm going to add into their routine, into their diet also. But again, it's a consideration. I'm still looking at the individual on what are they most likely to not be intaking, not have. Okay, those are the things that I'm going to supplement for. And so this is just another example but how we market. I mean, we've marketed to women that they need this food or they need these nutrients, when it's like, well, our bodies need the same nutrients. A couple examples of what you might need a little more of. But for the most part, they're all, what's essential is essential. What's essential for men is essential for women. But there are considerations of what does each sex tend to get less of. Therefore, that's where I'm going to go ask questions about in case we need to supplement.
Yes. Now let's get to special considerations or things kind of outside of what we just talked about. Detoxification tends to be more important for women. They tend to accumulate more, for lack of a better term, I hate using this term because it's totally bastardized, but toxins. So things in the system like molds, or some of these forever chemicals. There's a few reasons for this. One of them is, and we didn't say this in the diet section, but women, if they have digestive issues, they tend to veer towards constipation, whereas men are more likely to have loose stool. Now, constipation means you are going to be storing and getting rid of these things less if you're more constipated. If you go to the bath, if you have a bowel movement once every 2 or 3 days, which is relatively common, much more common in women than men, you're more likely to store and store up certain toxins you need to get rid of, because that's one of the main ways you get rid of these things. The other reason, and this is the main reason, this is the big reason, women tend to be more exposed more to a lot of these chemicals that build up in the system because they use more makeups and products that contain these things. And so detoxification is a more important consideration for women. So what does this look like? This looks like supporting your liver with liver health, like glutathione supplements. This looks like using a sauna. This looks like being very consistent with water intake and fiber. Fiber, of course, helping with the bowel movements, but also fiber is a great way to get rid of some of these chemicals. And so when you look at tests of buildup of certain things and you ask functional medicine practitioners, it's a little bit more common in women to have certain high levels of certain things. But again, the main reason is just they're exposed to more of these chemicals because of the products that they use.
So if that's true, Sal, is there, do we have much research on comparing like gut health and stuff when comparing men and women? Or is it, so tell me.
Yeah, so women tend to have more gut issues, but constipation being the big one, and SIBO tends to be a little more common in women because of that.
I've definitely heard Hashimoto's and then thyroid.
Oh yeah, the autoimmune stuff. Yeah, because men and women have different.
So it is higher in women. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Okay. But a lot of it also has to do with just they're just when you're using makeups and products, hair products.
It's exposure. Yeah.
There's lots of these chemicals in these products that, your skin is the largest organ in the body. So if you're putting that on your body all the time, you're going to build up more of it. Now, lastly, this is the most important part. And Adam's been saying it the whole episode. None of that matters. Individual variance trumps everything. Yep. So when I took a client in, my consideration was always the individual. I never looked at them. I'm like, woman, we're going to do this. Man, we're going to do this. It was always like, how you been working out? What does your day look like now? What are your goals? Let me watch you move. And it was about those individual considerations. It was about the individual. So what that means is you listen to this episode and some of this doesn't feel right for you. It's not right for you. You got to listen to your body and consider yourself an individual, because the variance, and again, we're so much more common, so much more alike than we're different. But within that is this wide variety of individuals based off of experience and lifestyle and goals and potential, prior injuries, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, this is so important because for all the things that are marketed to just women or just men, there's a case where I can make that, my female client should do what you're saying, this is just for men. Yeah. And my male client should be doing what you just said because of the individual variance. If a woman did come in and tell me, Adam, I don't want any ass work at all. I want jacked arms, and I already eat like 8,000 calories a day. Help me get there. Like our approach is going to look way different than the average thing. And it might look like a lot of the advice that you give to men. And so that is what matters most is finding out all those things. There's small things. I think the most important of all the things that you had listed was the preference. Yeah.
The aesthetic difference.
When you think about
that's the biggest one.
When you think about the greatest gap between men and women when it comes to training, it's really with the desire.
How they want to look.
How they want to look.
Totally.
It's mostly
pretty consistent.
That's very consistent.
Yeah, I've never had a woman come up to me and say they want jacked.
I know I said that kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm serious.
Have you guys ever had a female, I want jacked arms?
No. That just doesn't. It's so. And
I don't want any neck
because they have said that, and that's what that's the preference. Then there are there's some things that we take into consideration, and because the percentage of women that are asking for these same things, you can get away with saying, most women.
At the end of the day, like we're assessing, we're like playing detective in the very beginning. We're trying to consider all the variables, right? And so like being the different sexes, there's different challenges and different considerations to be made, but there's a lot of other factors in there that we're looking through about past history, where there's like dysfunction, where there's imbalances, like, where there's the things in the diet that we could tweak and adjust. And it's like every person has like this whole laundry list of variables that we got to get through. So this is pretty insignificant.
Now, why this conversation though is so important is because many times the stuff that's marketed to them is the opposite of what's for them. Is not good. For example, I find this super patronizing, right? Like the fact that women have been told like this is how you build this body, and it's all these bullshit exercises, high repetitions,
not effective exercises,
not effective at all. Like it's like the worst advice for them. Yeah. So not only is this is for women, this is for men is a dangerous not dangerous, but it's not a ideal rabbit hole to go down for most people. But then many times the direction that this so-called programming is for just women is actually like the worst thing, or not ideal at all. And there's way better things. No,
the big difference again between men and women is the workout programming based on the fact that women tend to want to look different than men do, but they're using the same exercises. The exercises that build the best butt and the best delts and the best back are the same.
We're just going to shift them around.
You're just going to shift the priority. You're going to put more volume in one area than another. And that's pretty much it. Now that does make a difference. That's not nothing. That does make a difference, but that's pretty much it.
Yep.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Look, are you struggling to see results with your butt workouts? Are your glutes not responding? We have a secret to a great butt guide. Now, this gives you strategies, exercises, nutrition tips on how you can develop a great backside. You can download it for free right now by clicking on the link below in the description.
We have some questions. The first one is, should I train differently based on my cycle?
No, this is another brilliant way to market to women.
Yeah.
They're like, when you're ovulating, you have more of this hormone, less of that hormone, more dopamine. This is when you should train hardest. And then progesterone's high here, and then estrogen is high here, and it's low here. That's when you take a break and whatever. They actually just did a study. And they did a study, and they took two groups of women. They trained them differently. One group trained the same the whole time through. The other group trained based on their cycle. Guess what the difference was in muscle building and performance?
Nothing.
Zero.
Nothing.
Zero, zero, zero. There's no difference. I never trained a female client based on her cycle. I always trained a female client based on how she felt.
How's she feeling that day?
I don't care about your cycle. I care about how you feel. How do I know when we should go easy today? Because you're tired.
Yeah.
You don't feel like you have enough strength.
You're overstressed.
You're stressed. How do I know we should go hard? Man, you feel good. Your diet was good. You had good rest. Like, let's go for it. I don't care if you're on your period, off your period, ovulating, whatever. That doesn't matter. It's based off of how you feel. By the way, if you're a woman, you know this. You might generally feel a certain way during a certain time of your cycle, but it can also be very different.
It is very different.
It can affect them all differently.
This is if you've trained enough people, you already know this, like, because you find this out. Like, you train enough women, and every day of the cycle, I've heard a different woman tell me she feels amazing.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's what matters more than anything else. So there's no way I would follow some generic program that says, oh, when she's on this day of her cycle, scale back on this. When she's on this day, increase that. Oh, cut back on. It's like, because
that's just marketing.
I can give you an example of a female client that has felt the opposite of what that says you should feel on said day. And so the most important consideration to make is how that client currently feels. Because another thing, even if your point with the hormones at optimal levels for building muscle on this part of the cycle, if she got terrible sleep the night before, or a fight with her husband the night before, that trumps all that shit.
Yeah.
Like, she's going to be like, I don't care if it's the best day of the entire month for her to build the most amount of muscle based off of hormone profile and energy and dopamine and all the things you're talking about. All that goes out the window if she had this big, huge fight and terrible sleep the night before and didn't eat enough protein and is behind on nutrients. Like, those things all play a much bigger role. And again, I would have to pivot as a trainer. So these gimmicky programs that target women for
effective
things like
marketing.
It is effective marketing.
Should I take more calcium for osteoporosis risk?
This is hilarious. So you need calcium, you need magnesium, you need vitamin D, vitamin K, probably if you're taking vitamin D. All important for bone development, but it's unless you're lacking them. In other words, if you have a calcium deficiency, you should take calcium. But if you're not lacking them, then taking more of them isn't going to build more bone. You need to give your body a reason to build stronger bones, and that's to strength train. That's no different than building more muscle. Like, if I don't strength train, I'm not going to build more muscle, okay? If I'm not going to strength train, I'm not going to, or have weight-bearing exercise, I'm not going to have stronger bones. By the way, this message of calcium for osteoporosis was hammered into women through the 80s and 90s, resulting in lots of problems, calcium deposits in women's arteries and higher heart attack risk, because they were taking so much calcium in supplement form. The calcium had nowhere to go, and ended up causing problems in their arteries. So no. Unless you have a calcium deficiency, then taking calcium is going to do nothing for bone strength. There is nothing that compares to strength training for strengthening your bones. It's so effective at building bone that if you put it in, compared it to all the other things, including medications that women will take for osteoporosis, everything's way over here. And then over here in a different universe is strength training.
What do
That's
they
how
say?
effective
It forces the language of the cells.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's the only way it receives that information to grow, right? So you're growing your muscles, you're growing your ligaments, you're growing your tissue, you're growing your bones all together. So resistance training overall.
I mean, if a female client, or a male client for that matter, asked me this question, I would respond the same way, which is, we should get your blood work done and see if you're deficient in anything. And that's what you should supplement for.
Yeah.
So, and they make, I mean, we're at a place now where they make at-home tests that are super easy for people to get their blood panels done and find out where you're currently at. And that goes for everybody. Everybody should do that, because we've always talked about this, even though we talk a lot of shit about supplements, as far as like how much value they are to the average person. When it comes to things that you're deficient in, supplementing for that can be massive for people. And so it's worth the investment to get your blood work done, get a test, see if you're deficient in anything, and then take what it says according to that. That will pay you back.
What is the best way to exercise while pregnant?
I love this question. So the best approach to exercise while you're pregnant should be taken like this. if you're going to start a workout program, the best time to start is before you get pregnant.
Yeah.
Strength training is very protective during pregnancy because the odds are at some point during your pregnancy, typically the first trimester and maybe the last month of pregnancy, you're not going to want to exercise. You're not going to feel good. It's not going to feel great to go to the gym. And if you do, you're just kind of moving. You're not doing much. Strength training builds muscle, and that muscle tends to stick around and is very protective during those periods of time. So strength train leading into pregnancy.
That's
and then
everything. Yeah.
What I used to tell my pregnant clients was like, we're not trying to become more fit or chase PRs now. No. What we're trying to do
muscle
now is
preservation.
Stay healthy. We're just trying to stay healthy and listen to your body. So for some of my female clients, large percentage, that first trimester was not very much workouts. I had lots of. My wife was like this. Like first trimester was like, she was so nauseous, especially for like the
morning sickness.
Oh yeah, we're not working out for 5-6 weeks. But that strength training she did leading into it was very protective. But you want to listen to your body. You could do all the same exercises minus certain core exercises towards the last trimester. Split stance exercises you need to avoid once your belly gets in the way. Yeah, lying on your belly. Lying flat on your back can be an issue because it's hard to get into that position. It can place pressure on the baby, especially towards the last month of pregnancy. But really, it's just you're not trying to become anything fitness-wise during your pregnancy. You're just trying to maintain movement and stay healthy. But if you do it right before, kind of keep it going. Again, don't chase anything while you're pregnant. The recovery is remarkable. Huge. I mean, the difference in my female clients who went into pregnancy relatively fit, maintained some exercise during, and then the difference between them and other clients that I had who maybe hired me while they were pregnant, it's like, it was just crazy. It's just crazy.
I mean, when Katrina got pregnant, she'd already been training consistently, so she continued on with her normal MAPS program that she was already on before we got pregnant, all the way through pregnancy. She was actually up until like the last week before having MAPS. And then afterwards was when the consideration came in. She had to, I think it's like 6 weeks, if I recall, is what the doctor will tell them, no exercise. And then I eased her in with starter. So MAP starter is like perfect for somebody like that.
That's got to be our best postpartum program.
Yeah. It's and I tell you, the hardest thing for her was mentally doing that, what she would consider easy work when she had just came off I can't remember what MAPS program she was running during pregnancy right now. But whatever it was, is more volume, more challenging than starter. And I was like, listen, you haven't done anything for the last 6 weeks. You just had a baby. Like, you don't need any more than this. Just follow the program and go into it. And she did. She progressed nicely. Again, the hardest part was telling her to mentally calm down. You don't need to do any more. And then from starter, after that, she was rolling again. Yeah.
Now, because of this episode, MAPS Muscle Mommy, which is a great program for women based off of what they want to look like, and MAPS Starter, which Adam just mentioned. This is a great program postpartum, as long as you get cleared for exercise, a great postpartum workout program. Both of those programs are 50% off because of this episode. So if you're interested, you go to mapsfitnessproducts.com, use the code FEMALE50. That'll give you 50% off either or both of those programs. All right, I know you liked that episode. If you did, check this one out. Walking, it's one of the best things you can do for your health, bar none, but there's a better way to approach it. Yes, you can just walk, but if you follow the right protocol, it's far more effective. Let's talk about walking.
I can't wait to hear your walking protocol.
Well, there is. There is a protocol. So, and I'll start with the first thing, right? Because just first off, let me start with this. One of the reasons why walking is such a great form of just activity is because it's low risk of injury. Now, some